This story belongs to the 6th century, a century when Europe was not yet the Europe we know, when the ruins of Rome had barely finished crumbling and new kingdoms rose out of the dust. Kingdoms full of restless nobles, feuding families, and crowns passed through blood, often quite literally. And in the middle of it all was a queen. Her name was Brunhild. She came from far-off Spain to marry into the Frankish kingdoms. She was clever, ambitious, and if her enemies are to be believed, ruthless. So ruthless, some said, that she poisoned her own children. But is that the truth? Or just a story told by those who hated her? We will wander slowly through her life, from her royal marriage to her tangled feuds, from the rise of her power to the bloody chaos it left behind. And perhaps by the end, you will decide for yourself. Was she the villain or only the scapegoat? The story of Brunhild begins not in the cold forests of Gaul, but under the warmer skies of Spain. She was born around the year 543, a Visigothic princess, a daughter of the royal house in Toledo. Spain in those days was not the land of flamenco and oranges that we picture now. It was harsh, dry. The Visigoths who ruled there were stern. They carried the old customs of Germanic tribes, mixed with the fading shadow of Rome. Brunhild's father was a Thanagild, a king who ruled with a heavy hand. Her mother, Goisvintha, was a queen with her own sharp edges. We cannot know what little Brunhild was like as a child, but chroniclers later described her as intelligent, well-educated, and dignified. She could read, which was not common. She was trained in diplomacy. She could hold her own in conversation with bishops and kings. One might imagine her as a young woman in a sunlit courtyard, reading from a scroll, or perhaps riding a horse with confidence, her hair tied against the wind. And soon, she would be chosen for something greater than books or horses. The Franks, far to the north, were looking for wives. Kings liked to marry royal daughters from other lands to bring alliances. And so, Brunhild was married to a Frankish king named Sigebert I of Austrasia. He was not the grandest king. His kingdom, Austrasia, was one slice of the great Frankish pie. The Franks had a habit of dividing their land among brothers. So, instead of one united empire, they had Neustria in the west, Burgundy in the south, and Austrasia in the east. Brothers ruled beside brothers, cousins against cousins, a family map stitched together with rivalry. When Brunhild arrived in Austrasia, she must have felt the cold. Spain was warm stone and dust. Austrasia was damp forests and rivers that cut through gray plains. The people wore furs. The castles were wooden and drafty. But she adapted. The Franks liked her. They thought her refined, queenly, noble. In her bearing, she converted from Arian Christianity, the faith of the Visigoths, to Catholic Christianity, the faith of the Franks. It was a political move, but also one that earned her the favor of the bishops. It seemed Brunhild's marriage was off to a good start, but across the river, trouble was brewing. Sigebert's brother, King Chilperic of Neustria, also wanted a royal wife. Not to be outdone, he asked for Brunhild's sister. Her name was Galswintha. Poor Galswintha. She was married to Chilperic, yes. But her marriage was not like her sister's. She found herself in a household filled with quarrels and jealousies. Most of all, she found herself competing with Chilperic's mistress, a woman named Fredegund. Fredegund was not a queen by birth. She had been a servant. But she was clever, cunning, and ambitious. Chilperic loved her more than he ever loved his wife. And soon, Galswintha was found dead, strangled in her bed. The chroniclers are blunt. Chilperic had her killed so he could marry Fredegund. Imagine what that must have meant for Brunhild. Her sister murdered in a foreign land. Her brother-in-law now married to her sister's killer. The halls of the Frankish courts filled with silent glares. Brunhild did not forget, and she did not forgive. From this moment, her life became tied to the long, bitter feud between her husband Sigebert and his brother Chilperic, between herself and Fredegund, two queens at opposite ends of the map, two women bound by blood and murder. The feud would stretch across decades, across wars, plots, and assassinations, across generations. But for now, Brunhild still had her husband beside her. Sigebert and Brunhild ruled in Austrasia with growing confidence. They had children, a son, Childebert, daughters too. Their court was stable, their people loyal, and their enemy, Chilperic, was busy with his scheming wife. Yet history does not allow peace for long. In 575, the feud came to a head. Sigebert had always been cautious of his brother Chilperic, but as the years went on, his caution turned to ambition. He wanted more land, more power, perhaps even the throne of all the Franks. And so, war broke out. It was brother against brother. Sigebert's forces marched west. The nobles of Neustria, tired of Chilperic's rule, welcomed him. They opened their gates. They swore loyalty. It seemed Sigebert would triumph. Brunhild must have felt her moment had come. Her husband, the stronger king. Her rival, Fredegund, about to be cast down. Her sister's death finally avenged. But just as victory neared, fate twisted. At the town of Vitry, Sigebert was struck down, not in battle, but by assassins. Two men stabbed him right in his tent. Who sent them? The chroniclers do not hesitate. Fredegund. The servant queen, as cruel as she was cunning, had her rival's husband murdered. Brunhild was left a widow. Her children were left fatherless. The crown of Austrasia, once so secure, suddenly trembled. And this is where the story of Brunhild truly begins. She could have faded into obscurity. Many widowed queens did, sent to convents, cloistered away, forgotten in the pages of history. But Brunhild did not fade. She remained, she endured, and she fought. And so, with her husband gone, her rival triumphant, and her children in danger, Brunhild stepped forward into the bloody game of Frankish politics. But how did she keep her place when so many others fell? How did a widow from Spain, alone in a foreign land, turn herself into one of the most powerful rulers of her age? Brunhild was about 30 years old when Sigebert was murdered. Not old, not young, but old enough to understand that she had two choices: step back into silence or step forward into danger. She stepped forward. Her son, Childebert, was still a boy, too young to rule, which meant that Brunhild became his regent. Regency was always a fragile thing. It was like walking on thin ice. The nobles circled, watching for cracks. Bishops whispered. Courtiers shuffled papers and plotted in corners. But Brunhild surprised them. She ruled with a steady hand. She organized laws. She worked with bishops to support the church. She kept her son's throne secure. Some even admired her. They said she was wise, educated, able to govern as well as any man, perhaps better. And yet, admiration in politics is like perfume. It fades quickly, and sometimes it stings the eyes, because not everyone wanted a strong queen. While Brunhild tried to govern in Austrasia, Fredegund still reigned in Neustria. The two queens could not leave each other alone. Their feud deepened. They sent armies against each other. They bribed assassins. They stirred up rebellion. They used marriage alliances as weapons. Brunhild, perhaps, longed for justice, for her husband's death, for her sister's strangling, for every insult carved into her memory. Fredegund, on the other hand, fought simply to survive. She had climbed from servant to queen, and she would not be toppled. It is almost tempting to picture them as two chess players seated at a wooden board. The pieces are not carved ivory or polished stone, but living men, soldiers, children, husbands, priests, nobles, and every move spilled blood. The chroniclers, especially those friendly to the church, love to compare the two: Brunhild, the noble foreign princess; Fredegund, the cunning servant. But both were dangerous. Both were remembered for cruelty, and both left trails of corpses behind them. But where does the story of poisoning come in? It was in the later years of Brunhild's rule, when her children and grandchildren were grown. She had married daughters into noble houses. She advised sons and grandsons who wore crowns. She clung fiercely to power, perhaps too fiercely. When one of her sons died suddenly, whispers spread. Poison, they said. The queen's hand was in it. When another grandson quarreled with her and also died, the rumors grew louder. The tale said Brunhild poisoned her own children to keep control, that she preferred to rule through younger heirs she could manipulate, that she would rather see them dead than see them rebel. Is it true? It is hard to say. Medieval chroniclers loved to blame women for poison. It was a convenient story. Daggers were for men. Cups and vials were for women. And Brunhild, as a woman in power, made an easy villain. Modern historians tend to doubt the poison tales. They think her sons may have died of disease or of natural causes, as so many did in the early Middle Ages. But the rumor stuck. And once a rumor takes root, it grows like weeds in the cracks of stone. So Brunhild's enemies used it. They painted her as unnatural, a mother who destroyed her own children, a witch-like figure, dangerous and unholy. As the years passed, Brunhild grew older. Her hair grayed, her face once admired hardened. But she did not loosen her grip on power. This was unusual. Most queens stepped aside when their sons grew up. Brunhild did not. She wanted to guide, to control, to command. Her nobles began to resent her. They said she ruled too harshly, that she played favorites, that she interfered in matters best left to men. Even the bishops, once her allies, began to waver. And always, Fredegund's shadow lingered. Though Fredegund died in 597, her son Clotaire II carried on her fight. He ruled in Neustria, and he waited, patient as a wolf outside a sheepfold. In the year 613, Brunhild was nearly 70 years old, a rare age in those times. She had outlived most of her enemies. She had seen husbands, brothers, children, and rivals buried. But her end was near. Her great-grandsons, the heirs she tried to protect, were captured in battle by Clotaire II. The nobles of Austrasia, weary of her rule, betrayed her. They handed her over to the enemy. Clotaire did not forgive. He wanted vengeance. He accused Brunhild of every crime, of killing kings, of poisoning sons, of causing 30 years of bloodshed. The trial was swift, the sentence cruel. They say she was tortured for 3 days, her flesh torn, her dignity stripped, and then she was tied to the tail of a wild horse, dragged across the plain, her body broken until nothing remained. It was a punishment meant not only to kill, but to erase, to grind her name into dust. And yet, it did not erase her. We still speak of her now, more than 14 centuries later. So, who was Brunhild of Austrasia, a queen who began as a Spanish princess, riding into the cold lands of the Franks, a widow who refused to vanish, a mother who lost children and perhaps was accused of killing them, a rival locked in a lifetime feud with Fredegund, the servant turned queen. She ruled for decades in a world that did not want ruling women. She built roads, she worked with bishops, she kept her dynasty alive for as long as she could, and yet she was remembered above all for poison. Perhaps it is because poison is quiet, like whispers in a hallway, like rumors that slip through walls. Perhaps it is because we find it difficult to believe that a mother could love power more than her sons. Or perhaps it is simply easier in the end to make a woman into a monster. Imagine Brunhild's story not as a tale of poison, but as a tangle of shadows and survival. A woman who walked into a foreign land and refused to leave even when every hand was raised against her. History remembers her as ruthless, but perhaps she was only hard as stones, hard as onions and regret. And with that thought, let the past grow quiet again. The story is told. The queen is gone,